Rosie, there you are.
Hi everyone. Welcome. It's now the top of the hour. We're going to give our participants a couple more minutes to log on. We'll start off at 2 past the hour. And feel free to, a lot of you are already doing this, feel free to comment in the chat box, connect with each other, make an introduction. We're really happy to have you here.
And I also want to chime in. And although I welcome you again, I welcome those of you who are already on and look forward to also hearing from you. And I see Ellen Snortland, my goodness, how lovely.
And Ellen, to answer your question, we have a lot of people registered for this call, and so we're not going to be doing the videos for everyone because it would probably be about 70 pages of attendees.
No, I think that as much as I'd love to see everybody's face, and I see so many familiar names.
Yes.
Jen, Diamond, and my goodness.
Hi, Bob. Welcome. Hi, Kathy Ann.
And Ravi, I'm glad you joined us. And Susan, my goodness.
Hi, Bobcat in California. Sending love to you and your mom.
And Lauren, I'm going backward here.
All right, so we will go ahead and get started. And it's really wonderful to see so many familiar names and new names and friends coming in through the chat box. And thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the Town Hall with Riane Eisler, hosted by the Center for Partnership Studies. My name is Rosie von Lila. I am a friend of the center and have been collaborating. My background is I've been working for the last 5 years in the finance industry with an organization called New America Alliance. I'm on the board of directors there, and we work to dismantle institutionalized racism within the finance industry. And as happy as I am to see all of you, it is a difficult time in our country right now. And we are in the midst of a rebellion against the tyranny of police brutality in this country. And when I put forth this idea to Riane to host this town hall, the idea was really for those of us who are newer collaborators with CPS and who care about Riane's work and care about this idea of partnership systems and partnerism. We really wanted to create an opportunity for our friends and communities to come together and check out this work. So I know that a lot of you on this call are very familiar and have been involved for a decade or 2 decades. And some of you have just heard about it because I asked you to come as my friend or because Lila or any of our other collaborators did. So thank you for being here today. When we scheduled this, we did not know that the events of the last 2 weeks would be transpiring and sending our country into the upheaval that it's in. We're in the midst of this rebellion because we're in a system that doesn't care about the majority of humanity. And we're in a system that doesn't care about the lives of Black and brown people. We're in a system that enables the abuse of children and youth, and that over-polices communities of color, communities that are anything other than the dominant gender or the dominant skin color that built the system that we're in. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here as a preamble, and then I'm going to introduce Riane. We'll go into some questions, conversation with her, fireside chat style, and then we want to hear from you. As we're going along, please write your questions into the chat box. Please write your ideas into the chat box. And then in the latter portion of today's conversation, we will get to your questions. So we are inarguably witnessing the erosion of America. And prior to there being protests and riots in over 100 American cities, here is the what's so about our country. 17% of children in this country live in poverty, the richest nation in the world, and 17%, almost 20% of our children live in poverty. We know that between 1987 and 2016, the mortality rate related to pregnancy, it increased by 250%. And we know that it affects Black women at more than 3 times the rate that it affects white women. We know that every night there are more than 500,000 people who are experiencing homelessness and are sleeping on the street or in their cars. And with the unemployment rate being what it is now, we're anticipating that that number is going to increase tremendously. The context for today's conversation is around Riane's work on partnership and domination systems. And I'd like to kick this off by reading a quote from a recording of Donald Trump that came out today. He said this, and I transcribed this in listening to the audio that you can find online, and this was a call with state governors. And I quote, "You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time and you're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate. The harder you are, the tougher you are, the less likely you are to be hit. You have to arrest people, you have to track them, you have to put them in jail for 10 years, and you'll never see this stuff again. And you have to let them know that. And the word is dominate. If you don't dominate your city and state, they're going to walk away with you. In Washington, D.C., we're going to do something that people haven't seen before. You've got to have total domination, and then you have to put them in jail." So with that, I do want to say today's conversation, given the context of what's happening with the rebellion, with the riots, with the upheaval around social injustice against Black and Brown people, I want to acknowledge that Riane and I are fair-skinned women. And with that, we have privilege. And we're here leading a conversation about systems change. And I very deliberately called my Black friends and my Asian friends and my Latino friends, and I said, will you please come to this as my friend and ask questions and let me know what you think afterwards. Because what we're here doing today is we are building our community around building a new system for the future. We're going to dive into why things aren't working for so many people. And we're going to talk about how we can move forward. But really, this is about nurturing the soil so that things can grow in. And we've asked you to be here today to look for some kernel of discovery that's a contribution to your work and what you see needs to get done. We're not here to be white saviors to tell you how to fix things. We're here to say, let's work together. This system isn't working for anybody. So Riane Eisler is one of my favorite people in the world. And she is a social systems scientist, a human rights advocate and attorney. She's a cultural historian, and her work over the last 30 years has touched the lives of millions of people. She has sold over 500,000 copies of her book, The Chalice and the Blade, which has been printed in 27 foreign editions. Since she published that book in 1987, she has published a total of about a dozen books, ranging from The Real Wealth of Nations to her most recent, which came out in 2019, Nurturing Our Humanity. Dr. Eisler is the president of the Center for Partnership Studies, which she co-founded with her husband, David Loy, in 1986. It's dedicated to research and education on the study of partnership and moving beyond domination systems. She's the only woman among 20 major thinkers, including Hegel, Adam Smith, Marx, and Toynbee, in macro history and macro historians, in recognition of the lasting importance of her work as a cultural historian and evolutionary theorist. Ashley Montague, the famed anthropologist who wrote The Elephant Man and numerous books on race and gender, called her book, The Chalice and the Blade, quote, the most important book since Darwin's Origin of Species. Riane, thank you so much for being here today, and really happy to have this conversation with you and with everyone tonight.
Well, thank you, Rosie, and thank you all for being here with us today. And I want to welcome you. Um, yes, we are at a really very critical place in our history worldwide, not only in the United States. And that was, of course, the topic, as Rosie said, of our discussion. But I think that uh, for me personally, uh, what's happened, the killing of George Floyd, the fact that African Americans are so disproportionately affected by the COVID pandemic, uh, plus all of the injustices that Rosie spoke about, that has a very personal feeling because I experienced as a child violence and injustice, that I became so passionate about this work. And I think, Rosie, you wanted to ask me questions.
Yes, so Riane, you have your own refugee story. What were you fleeing and from where, and where did you go?
Well, I'll start with what I was fleeing from. I was fleeing from another form of what we're seeing in this country, the racism of in-group versus out-group thinking and behavior. My parents and I fled from the Nazis. Most of my extended family was killed by the Nazis because they were not able to escape. And so for me, uh, this in-group versus out-group thinking that we saw in the killing of George Floyd, the dehumanization of others, be it based on that they're Jews or be it based on their being Black, that hits very, very deep for me, and it brings up my childhood. We were very fortunate. We were able to get to Cuba, to Havana, because, yes, my parents were privileged. Uh, they had the means to purchase entry permits, whereas others didn't. And however, the Nazis confiscated, of course, which is a word for official armed robbery, everything my parents had. So I grew up in the industrial slums of Havana, where I experienced for years another form of injustice, the enormous gaps between haves and have-nots that we see today, of course, in this wealthy nation. I also experienced that. Uh, but I want to say that it doesn't have to be this way. And this is really what I found in my work, in looking for a real alternative to what our president so succinctly, it's almost like he read my work, which of course he never did, called dominating. Dominating. That there are really only two alternatives in his mind. You either dominate or you're dominated.
Mm-hmm.
And that then, of course, justifies all of this inhumanity.
Mm-hmm.
There is an alternative, and I've called it the partnership alternative. And as we continue talking here, I will talk more about this, but just as a kind of a heads up, to change that, it requires more than short-term measures, because we have to get to the roots of this in-group versus out-group problem.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, your family lived in Cuba for I think about 8 years, and then you moved
7 years.
7 years, and then you moved to Florida, and that was your first time to America. And what did you notice then? And around, like, what decade was that?
That was in the 1940s, right after the end of World War II. And we didn't really move to Florida. We moved to the United States. Finally, the promised land let us in. And we were absolutely horrified to find in the promised land what was then the legal and very overt maltreatment, segregation of the American South. So while my parents had at one point thought that they might settle in Florida, that became clearly not what we were going to do. And we left. Um, and eventually, after a stop in New York and a stop in Chicago, well, we finally got to LA, and there was nowhere else to go. So we settled in Los Angeles, where I grew up.
Mm-hmm. And you've told me before that in your 20s living in Los Angeles, you came to realize not only were you experiencing discrimination for being a refugee and being a Jew, but eventually you discovered that you were experiencing discrimination from being a woman. What did you realize around that?
Well, yes. In fact, when I woke up as if from a long drugged sleep, along with thousands of other women, uh, to realize, well, I realized that as much as having been born Jewish had almost cost me my life. I mean, we escaped by a hair's breadth. But my goodness, I hear my voice is barely audible. Can you hear me now? Thank you so much, Ravi, for mentioning that. Um, uh, as much as that almost cost me my life, I realized that having been born female, that in all my years of so-called higher education, for example, there had been hardly anything by, about, and for people like me, women. And so I did throw myself from the beginning into the women's movement. Founded the first center in Los Angeles on women and law, wrote the first and only mass paperback on the Equal Rights Amendment. And when that failed is when I really returned to the questions of my childhood, because it was clear that we need a cultural transformation. But the question was, transformation from what to what?
Mm-hmm. And let's see, you have I want to go to a question that Donna Mills just asked. Donna says, I'm not asking people of color to tell me how to fix this. As someone who listens with intent, what do you need me to hear? And I think that's an amazing question, Donna. I can only assume from the first part of that statement that your skin looks like mine and that you're not a person of color. And we're going to dive into here in a moment into the dominator partnership continuum, which will help explain why things are the way that they are. And as I said at the top of this call, what we're doing here is Riane has, for the last, gosh, really, Riane, it's going on like 60 years of work. You really started,
not
but
really 30. It's about 35 years, because I spent part of my early life as an attorney, as a systems scientist, with absolutely very little consciousness. I did work in the civil rights movement,
mm-hmm.
but it really wasn't until, as I said, after the Equal Rights Amendment, which simply would have said that no federal or state law or action could discriminate on the basis of sex. And it was a very simple thing, got defeated, that I really threw myself into this research to try to understand what really are the root causes of this and how can we change them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Donna, that's what's here to listen for is what is the fertile soil? What's one thing that you discover here that can support in your work? It may be that you end up getting involved with CPS. It may be that you find some nugget that helps you see something in a new way for volunteering in your local community. We'll get deeper into this, but I loved your question about what is it you used to hear. Okay, so let's see. Riane, let's talk about, so you spent a decade researching the chalice and the blade, and you came already with a background in human rights work, women's rights work. What were some of the ahas that you had that you discovered in your research for the chalice and the blade?
Well, there were so many ahas in there, but I want to backtrack for a moment to what I saw and experienced in Vienna before we fled, because my feelings at this juncture about racism in this country really always awaken in me what I saw about anti-Semitism there, where Nazi people, and it wasn't only the soldiers, it was people uh, brutalized, made old Jews scrub the sidewalk when I was a child, and I couldn't understand how this was possible. How can people be so inhuman? And when I embarked on this research, my question was, what really, what kind of social system? Because we also have a capacity for caring. I mean, so many of us here have this capacity and are horrified uh, by what's happening and what has been happening. Uh, we have an enormous capacity for consciousness, because you have to be very unconscious not to realize how terrible and wrong racism is. Uh, for caring, uh, for creativity, but we also have a capacity, yes, we do, or we wouldn't see it, for insensitivity, cruelty, and destructiveness. And so my question when I embarked on this research was just what kind of society supports the former set of human characteristics rather than the negative set of human possibilities. And it was very clear from the very beginning that by looking at the through the lenses of conventional categories like right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, I couldn't answer these questions, because if you really think about it, there have been oppressive, repressive, violent systems in every one of these categories. And I also discovered something else, which takes us to root causes that, strangely, just as studies of societies and so much of what I had taught had nothing about the female, women, uh, uh, our conventional social categories either marginalize or simply ignore the majority of humanity, women and children. And that was a big aha. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, really big. And once we become conscious of this, we realize how flawed really our understanding of what is needed for transformational change has been.
Mm-hmm.
But I also discovered in the course of this uh, that it hasn't always been this way. And that's very, very important for us to know, that in this, what I call the partnership domination continuum, for millennia, that's right, thousands and thousands of years, uh, we humans lived in ways that orient more to partnership, where instead of this top-down system, be it in the family or be it in the state or tribe or in the economy, instead of these rigid straitjackets, for women and for men, where, as Trump put it, to be a real man, right? To not be despised as weak. You've
Mm-hmm.
got to be brutal. You've got to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of that, you had much more fluid gender roles and relations. And of course, we're seeing movement in that direction today. And I want to say to you that this is fundamental, and it relates to racism. because as long as children grow up ranking one form of human, the male form, over the other form, the female form, they have, before their critical faculties, before their brains are formed, they have a template for racism, for anti-Semitism, for all kinds of in-group versus out-group thinking, whether it's Shia versus Sunni in the, in the Middle East, uh, whether it's white against black in the
Yep.
United States, whether it's the anti-Semitism, which is again resurging during this time of regression to domination. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to pay attention to the whole of humanity. And we certainly have to change our economic system, which the
But before we go there, Riane,
okay.
let's jump into, we have a couple slides to share with everyone. And so give me just a second to do this glorious thing and show you how the sausage gets made over here. Okay, there we go. All right. So this shows us, oh, there we go. Oh, hold on, excuse me. There we are. So Riane, you were just describing on the domination partnership social scale. So on the left-hand side, we have domination, and you were talking about in-groups and out-groups. What kind of in-groups and out-groups are those? Could you reiterate that?
Whether it is what we're seeing right here, racism, of what I experienced as a child. So, with brutality, really, I mean, a gang of Nazis broke into our home and dragged my father away, the most powerful figure in my life. My mother got his release by a miracle, displaying what I call spiritual courage, the courage not to slay the enemy, but the courage to stand up against injustice out of love. She recognized one of the men as a former errand boy for the family business, and she got furious.
Mm-hmm.
But everything is structured differently in partnership and domination systems, starting in families,
Mm-hmm.
starting in families. And yes, there are hierarchies, but they are because we need new language, uh, rather than having hierarchies of domination, because we know those, you better obey, like Trump said, you know, you've got to dominate and they've got to obey and they've got to be punished, which are maintained by fear or force. You have what I call hierarchies of actualization, where power is used to empower rather than disempower others. I mean, it's a whole new world, and yes, we need new language that goes beyond the conventional categories.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned, a couple of moments ago, you were mentioning about needing new economic systems. And so one of the things that you talk about is the need to account. Actually, let's first say, so the succinct definition of partnerism is a social and economic system that develops our human capacity to care for people and nature. And that's really what has been missing from our economics. And so in your definition of partnerism and in the Real Wealth of Nations, you describe the old economic map. Excuse me.
Which basically leaves out, I mean, it's almost ludicrous if you look at it, because lying there on the floor are the three life-sustaining sectors of the economy on which everything depends. The household economy, the natural economy, and the unpaid community economy. So the economic map that I've proposed in the Real Wealth of Nations, a caring economics of partnerism, includes those sectors so that we have a more complete, just as we really can't understand and change really in a sustainable and long-term way our social systems without including the majority of humanity, women and children, in our understanding of what society is all about. We cannot change economics without taking into account these unpaid sectors. And the COVID pandemic, of course, has shown, hasn't it, the enormous value of the work of care, be it in households for those of us like my husband and I mean, he's 95, we're in complete isolation at this point, and I'm the main caregiver, of course. Uh, but so many of us find ourselves that way, or whether it's healthcare, or whether it's the people who are, many of them, black or brown, who are risking their lives so that we have food on our, so that we can survive. That's care. That
Mhm.
is care. And I won't go into the details right now, but one thing that if you take nothing else away with you, this is really important. You know, human societies, human economies, human belief systems, they're human creations. We created them. And as I show in The Chalice and the Blade and in Sacred Pleasure and in other books, uh, we've been on a domination detour, really, for 5,000 years from our original direction towards not a perfect society, but a more caring and balanced way of life. Uh,
Mhm.
we can use that template of the partnership system. It's a long term project, but we can build the foundations for a partnership system, including a caring economics of partnerism.
And um, before we jump into the social wealth index, I want to say Trevor Noah made an amazing video over the weekend. It's 18 minutes long, and in that he says something that I say about our Constitution, which is our Constitution is our fundamental contract that we make as a society. And he says society is a contract that it's a contract that we sign amongst each other as a group, and it can either be spoken or unspoken. And he says we agree on the common rules, the common ideals, common practices that identify us as a group. And that group can be team humanity. And he says that the contract is only as strong as the people who are abiding by it. And what we're seeing right now, we heard Harvard professor Cornel West say a couple days ago that what we're witnessing is the erosion of legitimacy of our leadership. And that's the erosion of our authority leadership, the police, erosion of our government leadership. And that's when we end up in both a constitutional crisis, but really in a revolution. And so as we think about, okay, everything is eroding, everything is falling apart. And so will you share about the social wealth index and how that is a tool for us to rebuild, not rebuild, to build a new economics that includes everyone?
Well, first of all, I want to say that all this talk about returning to normal, a normal in which almost 1/5 of our children lived in poverty, many of them traumatized, a normal in which uh, the gaps between haves and have-nots were horrendous, a normal in which racism flourished, a normal in which climate change, where so many people are in denial, many of them because they were traumatized by dominator child rearing and a rigid gender stereotypes in their early childhood. Let's not forget that. So, uh, but people have called me a practical visionary, and that is exactly what I am. So, I we developed some new metrics because we measure what we value what we measure, and what we don't measure is not considered important. So we have been working at the Center for Partnership Studies on a very different set of metrics, not only different from GDP, which is a mess, but also different from most so-called GDP alternatives, which demonstrates the economic value of caring for people and nature, which really has a complete economic map So it addresses issues that are outdated. Capitalist and socialist theories leave out for both Marx and for Smith caring for people, caring for nature. They just saw that as reproductive work, not productive work. So this is very important. Now, I know we have to address some immediate issues at the same time, but if we don't pay attention to the long term, if we don't have a clear vision of what we're trying to build, which is a partnership rather than domination system, and what the components of that are, we will continue to have regressions, especially in this age of rapid technological change.
Okay, so I'm going to do a quick summary to connect all of those dots, because given that your body of work runs more than 30 years in length, there's a lot there. So, and jump in here if I go off course. Starting about 8,000 to 6,000 years ago, male dominance set in, and we saw the subjugation of women and goddess-focused cultures, and that set in this systemic oppression of women. And as a result, women have been seen as a means of reproduction and household work, quote unquote, women's work, caring for the kids. All of that has been not valued at all, seen as reproductive work. Enter Adam Smith in the 1700s, invents capitalism. He doesn't have any concern for valuing women's work, caring for the house, which if you look in our terms now, caring for the house includes caring for the planet. So that's not included. And then we have 1800s, Karl Marx comes along, same thing. Neither of their systems address the fact that half of humanity isn't accounted for in our economic measures. And we fast forward, in the 1920, women get the vote. We have the civil rights movement. We have the women's rights movement. So we have all these eras, these periods, these movements of progress where we see more equality, more freedom of expression, more liberty. And now,
can I interrupt? Because all of these progressive movements challenged a tradition of domination. And this is what we have to understand, that we're all in this together. But go ahead, please.
So,
but we didn't pay enough attention to the foundations.
Yes.
To the primary human relations between parents and children, and between the female and male form of humanity, without which, of course, none of us would be here.
Right.
That affected economics with a gender system of values, which you've been explaining, where there's always enough money for prisons, the domination, right, of the sort of the archetype of the punitive father, or for weapons and wars, the hero as killer, but we don't seem to have enough money for caring for people. For healthcare, childcare. I mean, this is something we have to really begin to understand and change.
Yes. So Social Wealth Index then is a tool that Center for Partnership Systems is creating. It's under development currently. There will be a white paper coming out next January. And the index is really going to take about another 18 to 24 months to produce. And then it will be a tool that's available for local policy, state policy, federal policy. So our goal is to work with legislators to create caring policies. Policies that value the orientation towards partnership and care and investment in children. And to sum it up, we like to say that partnerism includes everyone. And we're going to go now to questions. And before we do that, I want to show, so we have one question, which is, how can this work? Actually, at a time when people are taught by the system that the only way to change it is to be the dominator, how can we reach future generations to work in partnership to build a system that cares for and includes everyone? And I want to show a video that came on this weekend. That's just a 2-minute video. that tells this story and asks this question.
I understand. Well, we worried about this. I understand. But we won't stand up for it. I understand. They get killed on the come in, talk to me. I understand. How old are you? I'm tired of this. How old are you? I'm 45 years old. 45 and I'm 31. And I'm tired of seeing. And you the older generation than me, and I am too. And we've been standing around as the older ones, taking all this bullshit. Always hoping for a kumbaya fucking y'all. Come on. Always standing around for a kumbaya. Ain't nobody coming to protect us. Let me tell you, we gotta start our own fucking life. I understand. But let me tell you something right here. This 16. He's 16. Oh my God. Kill him, he's 16. What we gonna do? You tell me. What we gonna do? This ain't the way. Because they ready to let loose. If the United States president say, if you loot, we shoot. You think doing this for us? I know it. It's on the way. But it's time to stand up. At this point, I'm ready to die. What's going on? Let me tell you something. That's the problem that we got. That you see right now. It's gonna happen 10 years from now. And at 26, you're gonna be doing the same thing I'm doing. You understand that? 10 years. You're gonna be right here too. But he also got to. So what I need y'all to do right now at 16 is come up with a better way. Because how we doing it, it ain't working. He angry at 46. I'm angry at 31. You angry at 16. You understand me? Putting yourself in harm's way is not the way. No, it's not. You and the other your counterparts the same age and that has that same power. Y'all come up with a better way. Cause we ain't doing it. Oh my God. And I have a 5-year-old son. Oh my God. And it ain't happening. How much 5 years ago, keeping my stock did the same shit y'all doing.
And I think that we are talking about a better way. And what we need to do is to really uplift the people who are modeling good behavior. And there are those, like the sheriff of Flint, who marched with the people. At the same time, however, and this is work that has to be done simultaneously. Yes, we need training for policemen in particular, but we need to change this in-group versus out-group thinking. And as I said, that starts early on. And if we don't pay attention to that, to the deflection of pain and fear and rage to the out-group because it's too dangerous to really express it against those on whom you are dependent as a child. I mean, think about that for a minute. That maintains the system. The economic system has to change to give value to this so-called women's work of caring and caregiving. Mm-hmm. That will change the system. Mm-hmm. And I really want to invite all of you to work with us, to contribute your thoughts, your ideas, both for short-term and for long-term transformative change.
Mm-hmm. I want to represent that what we're doing, the intent of this call today, as I shared with my personal friends, is to come and hear about this work and see what it sparks for you. What does it what does it spark for you in your life and the work that you're doing? Again, we're not here to be white saviors for anybody. We are here because there is language here that's useful for framing what's happening. And we can create a strategy together that works at the policy level. Killer Mike, the music artist, the rapper, he said something amazing. He gave a talk in Atlanta. His father is an Atlanta police officer. And he said, it's your duty to fortify your own house so that you may be a house of refuge in times of organization. Now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize. It's time to hold accountable those who are in office. It's time to hold accountable the district attorneys. It's time to hold accountable the police chiefs. And that's what we're here to do. So whatever the color of your skin, we invite you to be in conversation with us. And we're figuring this out is really what it is. The purpose of this today is to figure out who wants to build on the community of 30 years of CPS and come to the table and have a seat at the table with us to build this new future from an economic perspective, a social perspective, an education perspective. And Riane's message really gets to the root of it, is that it's about domination. So let's see, Riane, on the topic of new economic indicators, we have a question from Aleka Vial, which is, what do you think about the great news in New Zealand that their First Minister, Jacinda Ardern, announced that they'll be changing their development indicators because they're obsolete?
Aleka, thank you so much for bringing that out, because we really also need to focus on the movement towards partnership. And it's happening. It's unfortunately, of course, it's happening in this country too, but the media seem to only be sort of in this fascination with the White House and Trump. But not only Northern European nations, but also nations like New Zealand are, and not coincidentally, a lot of these nations have women leaders. And that's not because women are better than men, but it's because women are socialized for care. And men can be, I mean, I happen to be married to a very caring man, and some women are not caring. And some women shame men who aren't caring as just wimps, right? So let's not get this mixed up. But what we see in so many parts of the world today, in New Zealand, in Northern European nations, are caring policies. And by the way, we have been told that Sweden, Finland, Norway, which have been in the forefront really of the movement towards partnership, like for example, half their legislatures, our national legislature is female, that they're socialists. They're not socialists. They have a very healthy market economy. They are what they often call themselves, caring societies. And if anything, the COVID crisis showed that we need both government, but caring government, and a market. And we don't happen to have a free market, by the way, if you haven't noticed, with all these mega corporations. So there is movement. And we really need to understand that these nations have happier people. They're always on the top of the world happiness reports, but they also have very good economies. Mm-hmm. So partnerism, partnership works. That's the message.
So Andy Russell says, how do we get away from Darwinian survival of the fittest and into the truth that we have enough for all so that there's no more need for win-lose games?
I recommend that you read the books by my wonderful husband and partner, David Loy, starting with Darwin's Lost Theory. Darwin has been so misinterpreted. He's become the 800-pound gorilla for the domination system. In his book about human evolution, he called it The Descent of Man. I mean, you know, we're not visible here, the female half of humanity, but he was a product of his time. I think today he'd call it the Descent of Humanity. He emphasizes that there is a qualitative shift towards culture being important in human evolution. So how do we do this? We do this by building foundations for partnership systems at the same time that we address the immediate injustices and problems. One of these foundations is childhood. We know, even from the American Psychological Association, that spanking harms children. It harms their mental development, their emotional development. And the studies, I have a new book out with Oxford University Press, by the way, called Nurturing Our Humanity, How Domination and Partnership Shape Our Brains, Lives, and Future. And I highly recommend it because it's an in-depth analysis using findings from neuroscience to show the importance of both childhood and gender and how it is socially constructed. When we're talking about in-group versus out-group thinking, whether it's based on race or sexual orientation or what have you, we are really talking about this in-group of mankind, quote, and the female other as a kind of a template. And there, we today hear about intersectionality. That it's a system that we have to change. And if we don't pay attention to the majority of humanity, we cannot change the system.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the other cornerstones are economics and stories. We've been told a terrible story, like you just brought up. It's an erroneous story. And in Nurturing Our Humanity, we show again and again, drawing from clinical experiments, from findings from neuroscience, that if anything, our human capacity for consciousness, caring, and creativity is actually more human than these other capacities. But, and this is a big but, the issue is not just our genes, it's gene expression. And that is very different in a partnership or domination social setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, read Nurturing Our Humanity, everybody. It's rich. It's got a lot of stuff in it, a lot of information. Mary Claire Folk asks, are you familiar with Genevieve Vaughn's decades of research and experimentation with the gift economy? And let's see.
I am.
She wants to know if you'd like to do a town hall with Genevieve.
Well, but I disagree with Genevieve, because to say that that work should be done for no material rewards ignores the facts that even in these rich United States, women are significantly poorer than men. And women over 65, most of whom are or were caregivers, are paying the price. No Social Security, no pension, nothing. So as long as we have a monetized society, and money is a good invention, the problem isn't money, it's how we use it, it's how the values behind it, right? I mean, I love Genevieve, I think she's wonderful, but to talk about returning to a gift economy is maintaining the status quo.
Mm.
And men are doing more, not enough, but more of the care work in families now that women's status has risen. This is what we see in Nordic nations, that as the status of women rises, women are in parliament, etc., are heads of government, men no longer find it such a threat to their, quote, masculinity to also embrace more caring, so-called feminine, right? Because, to be a real man in a domination system is not to be like a woman, soft, caring. Got to get rid of that because it misshapes both women and men.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sandina Robbins says, COVID-19 and the political crisis has laid bare our country's fault lines. People are hungry for a new paradigm. So how can we move forward to create a caring society? And I would love to give a little bit of information on that, if you don't mind, Riane, to share what we're up to. So I'll share what our goals are by the end of 2021, and then share what are the immediate things that you can help with and how we can move forward. So by the end of 2021, our intent is that the term partnerism, social wealth index, and Riane Eisler are household names that are in the mainstream, that people have heard about this new idea of partnerism. And we're really looking at this in the context of, when communism or when socialism was invented, when capitalism was invented, those were new words that people had never heard of. And it took many decades for those words to sink in. But now, thanks to social media and the connection of technology, we can launch partnerism out into the world and have it take root at an accelerated rate. So that's our goal in the next year and a half. We are launching a communications campaign that's going to run the latter half of this year. If you're interested in helping to promote this work, please write in the chat box and say, I want to help. We're working on the social wealth index. We're going to have the white paper for that done by next January. We're intending to have a launch event for that at Davos next year. And then we will have a second follow-on marketing campaign about the social wealth index. In the middle of next year, by the middle of next year, we want to have written draft legislation for various states that propose, that are about caring policies. So here in New York, Assemblymember Ron Kim, who represents a district in Queens, he is already on board with partnerism and caring policies, and he's an advocate for Riane's work. I'm working to get several other assembly members here on board with this. So if you have political connections to governors, assembly members, state senators, federal legislators, we would like to meet them or have you be an ambassador for our work to help get this word out there. So Riane, so the question of how can we move forward to create a caring society, is there anything in there for you that you'd like to add to that?
Well, I saw a question, what is the caring economics? What is the caring economy? And I want to distinguish it, I'm so glad you asked, from the care economy. Since in the real wealth of nations, and if you really want to know what a caring economy is, the subtitle of the real wealth of nations is creating a caring economics. But in a nutshell, the devaluation of the work of caring for people and nature is what a caring economy changes. But it also includes the work for social justice. That is caring work. I mean, the fact that we don't care for people because they're poor or because they have a different skin color, I mean, that's the in-group versus out-group, the dominator and the dominated. That is really absolutely ingrained, like you remember the caveman cartoon? With one hand, he's got a weapon. With the other one, he's dragging a woman by the hair. So what we show children, that cartoon before their brains and their critical faculties are formed, and what's the message? That's how it is. That's how it's always been. And that is a lie. It need not be that way. We are moving away from it, and we lived for millennia not in that way. So there's so much I'd like to really share with you, but I want to say that you are the future. You are the agents for real cultural transformation. And if we focus on these four cornerstones in the long term, at this, childhood, gender, economics, moving to a caring economics, where caring for people and nature is understood to be valuable. In fact, the most valuable human work, especially in our age as we're moving towards automation. Think about that for a minute. You can't automate caring, at least not successfully. And new language, partnerism is new language. Social psychologists and linguistic psychologists tell us the truth. The categories available in a language, they channel our thinking, making it almost impossible to see other alternatives. And as long as you're stuck in right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, you've lost it right there.
Great. So we're just about to hit the top of the hour. Lots of people saying, I want to help. I'm so happy to see that. One of the big things, as I told my friends when we were organizing this, it's really important to everyone at CPS that diverse people be represented, that we have women of color, that we have men of color, that we have all different ways of thinking. And so please help bring your friends who are Black and brown and Asian and Indigenous. Please bring them to the table so that we can have a conversation with them to see how we can help them, and so we can help shift the systems toward partnership. Let's see, we're just about at time. Riane, any last words?
Well, it just occurred to me that if there are any Latinas or Latinos in the audience, we really need to bring this into the Latino community. Um, you know, and into the African American community, because we're all in this together, white, black, women, men. What we need is transformation. And this is the time. This is the time to not go back to the old terrible normal, to really use our creativity and our caring and our consciousness to, at the same time as we deal with the immediate, to also lay the foundations for sustainable, transformative change from domination to partnership.
So we will wrap up. Nancy Giordano says, please bring back Riane for another session. We will do more of these town halls in the future. Our goal is to continue keeping the conversation open and organize and strategize and mobilize. So with that, I want to give a shout out to everyone on the CPS team. Thank you to Ann Amberg, Sarah Salty. Thank you to Nyla Rogers, Valerie Young, Nancy Giordano, Josh Adler, Emma Pezak. Thank you for all of the work. I hope I didn't miss anybody. Riane, thank you to you and to David Loy, for your husband, for all the work that you have been doing for several generations now. You have transformed my life and made a huge contribution to many people on this call. So thank you.
And I want to thank you, Rosie, for this wonderful idea of having this town hall, and for being you, and for I really would like to suggest that if you are sequestered at home, read these books. They're available on Kindle. One of the reasons that socialism made such a dent, really, was because people read and discussed the ideas. Read them, apply them, change them, create,
Yep.
And be well, and take good care of yourselves. And thank you.
You see this on the awards shows for movies. Whenever somebody tries to remember without a list, they always inevitably forget some people. I forgot Francis Collins, David Fulton, Roderick, and Matt, and everybody else who's helping with the efforts for the Social Wealth Index. Thank you very much.
And I want to tell you that we do have some book clubs coming up, moderated by Rosie. So if you want to read the books and join us, that would be wonderful.
Yes, the next one is on June 3rd. Is that this week? No, not June 3rd. It's the following week, I believe.
It's the following week.
The following week gives you almost enough time to read the 400-page wonder of Sacred Pleasure, which is an extraordinary book about the vilification of women, sexuality, and pleasure, and the politics around it in theocracy. It made me feel very alive to be a woman in reading that book. So please join us. We'll send out the information through the newsletter. We have your emails now, so we'll send you some follow-up information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. And again, thank you so much, Rosie, and bless you all.
Bless you. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you very much for your time today.